So there's three pieces of our message. And we think these three pillars are sufficient to create the tipping point if we get it out to enough people. Why avoid GMOs? And that's primarily the health dangers, and you also have to discredit those that say GMOs are safe, like Monsanto and the FDA, and that's easy. 2, how to avoid GMOs. And 3, how to stop GMOs. There was a study in Canada where they found that 93% of pregnant women had Bt toxin in their blood, 80% of their unborn fetuses. That toxin, it breaks open the stomach of insects and kills them. Many people think it reacts with our own intestines in ways that may be similar. And the authors suggested that the Bt toxin may have come into these people's bodies through milk and meat from animals fed GM corn. We don't know. So if you want to avoid that, that's a big deal, because what are your three options? Is organic, wild caught, that's both fish and game, and 100% grass-fed, hoping that they haven't been fed GM alfalfa. And if you have any other meat, then it's likely to have been fed GM, including farmed fish. They feed GM soybeans. So this is all in the decision stage. Where do we want to sit in terms of, I'm going to tell you the hows, that was a little bit of a how-to, but then there's bovine growth hormone, injected into cows to increase milk supply for the cow. It revs up the cow, and the cows would also be eating GMOs, and there's more pus in the milk, more antibiotics, more bovine growth hormone, and more IGF-1, which is linked to cancer. Now think about it. Milk contains IGF-1. When we drink milk, our IGF-1 increases. That's regular milk. There was about a 10% increase in IGF-1 in one study, a longitudinal study with 2 different groups, if I recall correctly. And IGF-1 in high concentrations in premenopausal women is linked with a 7-fold increase in the risk of breast cancer. In high concentrations in premenopausal women. In high concentrations in men, it's linked to a 4-fold increase in prostate cancer. We would guess that there's only about 12% of the cows in the United States that are being injected with bovine growth hormone, of the dairy cows. So it's not in huge concentrations, but it does have a significant increase in IGF-1. So it may be okay for you not to worry about a little increase in the hormone if you don't drink a lot of it. Because if you're drinking regular milk that doesn't even have bovine growth hormone, you're drinking a lot of that, you may get a bigger dose of IGF-1 than if you drink a small amount of milk from cows injected with bovine growth hormone. So that's you know, you have to decide if that makes sense for you. I don't actually know the numbers in terms of how much IGF-1 is out there, because it ranges, you know, if Monsanto's study said, oh, nothing, maybe 80% more, but nothing, and another one is like up to 40-fold increase. We don't really know, or 20-fold increase. All right, so now let's, one more thing. In terms of the animals that are fed GMOs, glyphosate, which is the active ingredient for Roundup, it makes nutrients unavailable to the plants. And most of the animals that are fed in the United States eat Roundup crops: soy, corn, cotton meal, canola meal, sugar beet pulp, or alfalfa. And the nutrients are deprived in those crops because that's what Roundup does. It makes the nutrients unavailable. So the animals are eating this nutrient-deprived food. They're deprived of nutrients. Veterinarians sending the organs of these animals find a universal lack, for example, of manganese, in some cases no detectable manganese. These are important for metabolic processes. When you end up starving an animal of these nutrients, they get disorders and disease. So you may be eating animals that have disorders and disease, and they may be raised in feedlots, which is another issue. All right, so that's some of the things you have to think about. I think we've covered that enough. Let's talk about how, what we actually do. So the first line of defense is to buy organic. Now, organic has always been a trusted oasis for those of us seeking non-GMO foods, but it's never 100% guarantee if it contains an at-risk ingredient, because pollen does not read the signs. So if you have an organic corn chip, it may contain a certain amount of GM corn. It would probably be a tiny amount. If something's labeled non-GMO, same thing. You can't guarantee 0% corn that's GMO in a corn variety, in a corn chip. So if you want to be, I know someone that will not eat anything from corn because he doesn't want to have anything in his body. You have to decide what you're comfortable with. But we say one of the ways to avoid GMOs is to buy organic. Now, organic does not require testing for the presence of GMOs. So you can buy seed that says organic, or you don't have to always buy organic seed. If it's not available in your region for your product, for your area, you can buy non-organic seed. Some of it will be contaminated. Most of the corn seeds are the germplasm is created from Monsanto and other biotech companies. So you can buy non-GMO corn and have it contaminated there. You can plant it and have it cross-pollinated from a neighbor. You can harvest it and put it into seed storage. In the seed storage unit, you're supposed to make sure it's completely clean and document that. Maybe there was some mixing. So anywhere along the line, there might be some contamination. You're not allowed to intentionally use GMOs with organic. Occasionally, it's tested and there's fine contamination. Strauss Dairy found 6% of one of his feed suppliers' corn was genetically engineered. 6%, which is quite high. The others were not. The others were clean. So we got rid of that one and switched over. Usually it's less than 6% if there's a contamination. Now, the organic standards were not made with GMOs in mind because GMOs had not been on the scene yet. So it doesn't really address them in a way that's reflective of the commitment of organics to avoid GMOs. There's now a second verification program that's called the Non-GMO Project. How many people have heard of it? Non-GMO Project? Most people, about actually 35%. The Non-GMO Project came in at a time to say, okay, we're going to have a universal standard for making non-GMO claims. Up until that point, you could find non-GMO labels all over the place. I think there's about 1,200 claims, other than the Non-GMO Project, in products sold in Whole Foods. 1,200 different products that say non-GMO to some extent. Now, what does it mean, non-GMO? That's the question. It doesn't mean the same thing from one company to the next. I'm familiar with Eden Foods. How many people have heard of Eden Foods? So I know Michael Potter, the CEO, and they have a fantastic program for preventing contamination. They save their seeds. They test it constantly. They have a very low allowable threshold. They're basically a very clean and well-organized company around the GMO issue. Now, there's some people that say non-GMO because it's on their spec sheet, and that's the last they hear of it. You know, no GMOs, fine. And they don't ask any more questions. Some will do tests, but the tests will be very different. They will have a test where they'll not allow anything above 2% contamination, whereas someone else will be 0.1% contamination. That's a 20-fold difference. So it really has no uniformity, and it doesn't give us a lot of confidence, but it's the best that we had, and so our recommendation was, for years, buy products that say non-GMO, because they've designed their system to avoid GMOs. Again, they could have a tiny amount. If something says non-GMO Project verified, it's verified to meet the standard, and the standard still has an action threshold of 0.9% for food and 1.5% for animal feed. Everyone's targeting 0, but they can't say 0 tolerance because it's not practical. 33 bags of canola seed, non-GMO, were tested. 32 of them had contamination. Small amounts, but 32 out of 33. So our shopping guide requires products to be enrolled in the Non-GMO Project. And you can find the products on our shopping guide on the nongmoshoppingguide.com and the iPhone application Shop No GMO. You can find the company name and the products that have been enrolled and a little seal next to those that have been verified. By the end of the year, we expect that to change so that those that have been enrolled but not verified, the products won't be listed. just those that have been verified, which is the higher level. When I talk about the health dangers of GMOs, I create a bit of a fanatic audience sometimes, like as in all the time. And not everyone's a fanatic, but there's people who go, oh, what can I eat? And so they'll pick up the shopping guide, which I don't have here. You'll have a copy at the table at the end. They pick up a shopping guide, and I want to make sure that they can actually live with the food there. He's like, yes, you can eat 2 products. Enjoy both of them. And you could add salt, and you could add water. Those are non-GMO, and you could cook them in different ways. No, I had to be a little bit, more than a little bit compassionate. So our original shopping guide was the original shopping guide from Greenpeace, just asking companies, do you avoid GMOs? And so anyone that says they avoid GMOs, we say, fine, you're in. And then the non-GMO project came, and I said, I cannot list all 6 of your products, and that'll be it. Sorry, you have to have more products on there, because I don't want to freak people out and say, fine, here's your shopping list. Eden Foods, that's it, So when they had enough to actually be respectable, we shifted over to the non-GMO project enrolled, but most of them hadn't been verified yet. It was a new system. Now, out of the 5,500 or more products that have been enrolled, there's about 3,000 that have been verified. So now there's enough for people to actually build a shopping list from. So that's the second recommendation. Organic, non-GMO project verified. And then third is just look at the shopping guide. The fourth is avoid the at-risk ingredients. And this is what I do all the time. Avoid the at-risk ingredients. If it's organic, I don't worry about it personally. But actually, I don't want to hold myself up as a model. I'll tell you why. It may be that tiny amounts of corn are deadly, right? So if you say, oh, Jeffrey Smith's fine with eating a little bit of non-organic corn in his organic stuff, I don't want to give you that recommendation to follow my advice in that sense, but we do it institutionally. We say buy organic. So you have to make your own decision. Now, in terms of organic, I'll get to the at-risk ingredients in a minute, and then eating out in restaurants, and which restaurants are easy and what to say, and what about the blends and all that stuff. There's 4 ways to find organic on a package, and 3 of them are non-GMO throughout the ingredients. So it says 100% organic on the front, it's fine. It says organic on the front, it means 95% of the ingredients at least have to be organic, but the other 5% have to be non-GMO. If it says made with organic soybeans or made with organic ingredients, then at least 70% of the ingredients have to be organic, but the other 30% have to be non-GMO. If the word organic is not on the front at all, and it's only on one product inside the ingredient panel, so let's say you're reading an ingredient panel that says organic soybeans, but it also says canola. Then the canola may be genetically modified, because it's not the whole package which is bearing an organic label. It's just that one item, and you don't see the word organic anywhere else except in the ingredient list. And so that word organic doesn't tell you about anything else in the list. Okay, now, there's another category which I don't talk about much, and that is the enzymes and food processing components that may be from genetically modified microorganisms. Chymosin, which is used in 80% of hard cheeses, is a genetically engineered enzyme instead of using rennet, which is from an animal. Now, I chose not to focus on that very consciously for a couple of reasons. Some of these products are not even listed on ingredient panels. And they're very hard to identify which has and which doesn't have. And I have no idea of any information about the health dangers of these folks, these little critters. And I want it to be practical for people to eat and to create a tipping point. So my philosophy is deal with GM crops and RBGH first, create a tipping point, awaken the awareness of everyone, and then we can focus on enzymes and whatnot. But it's really good that organic does not use these GM enzymes. So that's a way to avoid that. So getting back to lifestyle and what you do, avoiding at-risk ingredients. We have a list of at-risk ingredients on the inside back cover. And not every single item in here always comes from a GMO. So it says glycerol, monoleate, glycine, hemicellulose. I have no idea, actually, personally, whether they always come from a GMO or occasionally. And we've been wanting to get a food scientist to let us know. But basically, the easiest way to avoid GMOs is to buy less processed foods. And that's where we go to what to do when going out to eat. If you go out to eat and you eat at a fast food restaurant, then nearly everything you eat will be genetically modified except the lettuce and the tomato. The ketchup will be genetically modified because it's all processed. And so you're going to end up with, let's say, 9 out of 10 processed foods have some GM component, maybe 80 to 90% is my guess. So when you go out to eat, you got to go to places that cook from scratch, and you're aware that some things are visible and some things are invisible. So the visible ones are polenta, corn chips, corn tortillas, tofu, soy sauce is sometimes visible. Now with corn on the cob, it's not the same percentage that's genetically modified as all the field corn, which is about 88%. It's going to be a lot less. In fact, the cross-pollination is per kernel, so you can actually have a corn cob that has one kernel that's genetically modified. And it's a gamble. It's a complete gamble. You buy something that's non-organic, it's a corn on the cob. Is it non-GMO or is it GMO? You'd have no idea. But if it's something that comes from blended corn, then it's certainly GMO, you know, corn syrup, things like that. So when you go to a restaurant, you can avoid the visible at-risk ingredients just looking at the menu mostly. Zucchini can be GMO. Yellow crookneck squash can be GMO, and papaya can be GMO if it's from Hawaii. But no other produce besides those three and the corn on the cob. That's it. The rest are the cottonseed oil, the canola oil, the soy, alfalfa, which is used as hay, sugar from sugar beets. So what I do is I look for the two major invisibles, the cooking oil and the salad dressing. Now again, it's lower risk than the stuff that still has the DNA and the protein, and you may choose not to worry about that. Because if you worry about that, you can write off most Chinese, Mexican, and Japanese restaurants.
And Indian?
Indian, I'd say I can get away with about 20, maybe 30% of the Indian foods. Some of them use ghee. One place I went to recently used olive oil in Indian. And sometimes you can go there and say, can you cook mine from scratch? Now, Indian tends to prepare their sauces early in the day. They cook them up, and so sometimes you walk in and say, sorry, everything is pre-prepared. And so they can't cook specially for you. But in many cases, for restaurants, you can call them and say, yeah, you're cooking soybean oil, so I don't eat soybean oil because it's genetically engineered. I like to say that, so I can be the first of many. I often say I don't eat genetically engineered foods, and that includes the soy, corn, and the cottonseed and canola oils. So what oil do you cook in? And there's a well, we cook in soybean oil. Says, okay, do you have any olive oil or butter if you're open to eating butter from maybe from cows that have been fed GMOs or RBGH? But still, it's not the other one, so it's an option for those that want. So do you have anything that you can cook in butter or olive oil or no oil? So when I go to Thai restaurants, curries are usually cooked in coconut milk. So they don't have any, but some stir fry it first. So I would say 20% of the Thai places that I go to, I can't eat anything, so I don't go there because everything is stir fried in soybean oil. But almost all of them have the curries free. Now, if you eat fish, you can have grilled fish almost anywhere and avoid GMOs because you can have grilled fish that has no oil. Or you can add olive oil or butter if they want to do something. Now, with olive oil, if they say olive oil, this makes Mediterranean really easy. You know, you got the Greek, Italian, Middle Eastern, Turkish. They love cooking in olive oil. But some of them will cut the oil, usually with canola. Once I saw it with soybean. They'll cut the oil. And so when they say we have olive oil, I always say, is it pure or is it a blend? Because if they blend it, they don't always tell you it's a blend. They'll tell you it's olive oil, but they'll blend it. So, and if they blend it, it's almost always canola. Now the bad news about olive oil, and I hate to tell you this, is that there is more olive oil sold in the world than produced. And there's a lot of canola oil being imported into Italy that we think goes out with the olive oil. But the canola that goes into Italy is probably non-GMO because they don't grow GM canola oil in Europe. They call it rapeseed, and they grow it or canola, whatever. But so it may not be pure olive oil. It's probably not cut with GM canola, but it could be. And it's not all of it. It's just that it's a pretty substantial fact that's known in the food industry that olive oil isn't always pure. Organic will tend to be a lot more reliable. And US makers of olive oil will tend to be very reliable, according to my sources. So the psychology is this. It can be really a problem to give up favorite food, to give up deep dish pizza when you visit Chicago. And I found out, by the way, that the pizza places in New York, some of them use olive oil in their dough, and some of them use soybean oil. I thought for years it was just going to be soybean oil, but some of them use olive oil. So it's like, wow, I can get New York pizza again. I grew up outside of New York. It can be really psychologically challenging. So, first of all, I don't think it's going to take long for us to get rid of the GMOs in the United States. So I would think, just think in terms of a short amount of time for this. And then think in terms of trying to go without GMOs for a certain period of time and seeing how you feel. Someone came up to me and said, you know, I switched to a non-GMO diet last year. And for 1 year, I lost 35 pounds. My husband lost 15. My 2 young kids lost 5 each. I said, well, what did you do? Nothing else. They just switched to non-GMO. So I would say, do it as an experiment and look forward to seeing the changes. And if you have energy about getting rid of Monsanto, if you have energy getting rid of the tipping point and all that, take that energy and turn it into empowerment. Instead of feeling like a victim, feel like a victor. Say, I'll determine what I consider food and not let it be dictated to me by the biotech industry or their enforcement wing, the FDA. So in that sense, create the psyche for making this a valuable statement. And some people like to do it because they want it to be bigger than themselves. We're doing this as a statement. We're doing this, you know, for the world. And of course, if you have kids, you're doing it for your kids. Or you're planning to have kids, you can do it for your kids. Now, in the psyche also, you interview a waiter or a waitress and you find out that the food has GMOs in it, it's really easy to get angry or depressed. But angry is a very dangerous emotion to throw at a waiter or a waitress, or even the restaurant owner. They have no idea. And if you're angry at them, you're in a much less powerful position to teach them, because they don't want to pay attention to you anymore. They want to get away from you. So you may carry around the extra shopping guides and give it to them and say, I'm avoiding GMOs, and you may want to consider doing that. And you give the shopping guide and you give the brochure about the health risks. And what can happen is potentially miraculous. I went to a Mexican restaurant in my town and I said, I don't eat GMOs. So what do you cook with? And he said, well, we figured out that there was one entree and one side dish. And 3 months later, I hadn't been to the place again. 3 months later, I hear that he has switched to non-GMO and organic. I show up and say, what happened? He says, well, you got me thinking about it. My son's autistic. And I started thinking about the food. So I spent a month and a half with new suppliers, and now I'm completely organic and non-GMO. And it was written all over his restaurant.
Where was that?
This was in Fairfield, Iowa. A little town in Iowa. In the same town, years ago, I went to one of my favorite Indian food restaurants, and I said, I don't eat GMOs. A lot of us don't eat GMOs. Can you get rid of it? And he said, come back in the kitchen and tell me what I have to do. And I looked at the soybean oil. I said, change that to a different oil, and you may want to switch that milk and the lassi to organic, and you're fine, because he cooked from scratch. That was it. And he switched. I wrote it up in the local paper. His foot traffic increased. Five more restaurants within 2 weeks said, we also use organic olive oil. We also use this. And they all switched. And I never discussed the health dangers with any one of them. It's economics. So it's a very, I went to Boulder, and I had just come from a GMO meeting, and we went to this place, and it was a healthy, crunchy Boulder kind of place. And I said I tried a new way of speaking to the waitress. I said, I have a dietary restriction. I said, that's how this one works. Yeah. Oh, what's that? And they're all like, dietary restriction, and they all go into their training. Okay, we know, what is it? Is it peanuts? Is it this? And so I said, I don't eat GMOs. She goes, oh. And I explained what had to happen, and she left, and out comes the chef. And he comes and says, I have just heard the best dietary restriction I have ever heard. And we spoke for 10 minutes, and by the time we were done, he was going to change the restaurant stuff and host meetings for the non-GMO group. I went to what is the symbol of classic Americana, Epcot Center. And I went to a restaurant